Silent, deadly, unseen. That's how we strike. Commander Samuel Whitaker, USS Tang. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beneath a blanket of stars, its surface calm and deceptive. The year was 1944, and the war between the United States and Japan had reached a pivotal moment. Deep below the waves, in the cold, pitch-black darkness, American submarines lay in wait, ghosts of steel and cunning, armed with torpedoes that could change the course of history with a single strike. The night was heavy with tension aboard the USS Tang, one of the most feared submarines in the Pacific. Commander Samuel Whitaker paced the narrow control room, eyes sharp on the sonar screen. His crew was tense but disciplined, every man knowing the stakes. "Captain's ready," said Chief Sonar Technician James "Jimmy" Larson, fingers flying over the dials, picking up faint echoes from miles away. "We've got a convoy," Larson whispered, voice low. "For ships, moving fast, just north of the Philippine Sea." Whitaker's gaze hardened. This was no ordinary convoy. It was a supply lifeline for the Japanese, laden with fuel, ammunition, and soldiers. Destroying it would cripple the enemy's ability to fight on islands like Leyte and Palawan. "Prepare torpedoes," Whitaker ordered, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "We strike from the shadows. No mistakes." The USS Tang was part of a vast underwater network of American submarines prowling the Pacific. By 1944, these subs had become the silent killers of the Japanese fleet. Their commanders knew the risks: depth charges, enemy destroyers, limited oxygen, but also the rewards. Every ship sunk brought the Allies closer to victory. Across the waves, the Japanese convoy steamed unaware, guarded by escort vessels alert for any sign of attack, but unprepared for the silent menace beneath. The flagship, a converted merchant vessel named Shinyo Maru, carried over 3,000 troops and supplies critical to Japan's war effort. Alongside her, the destroyer Tanakaze and two cargo ships cut through the dark water, their crews alert but confident. Inside the Shinyo Maru's cramped quarters, Captain Kenji Matsuda was issuing orders. "Maintain formation," he barked to his officers. "Speed at 15 knots. The Americans are desperate. We must not give them a chance." But the Americans had a secret weapon: intercepted communications and brilliant codebreakers who had revealed the convoy's course and timing. The USS Tang was not guessing. It was hunting with precision. "Target locked," Whitaker said quietly. "Depth set to 30 feet. Spread the spread. Fire in 3, 2, 1. Fire." For torpedoes streaked silently through the water, each one a steel bullet hurtling toward destiny. The explosions rocked the ocean's surface. The Shinyo Maru shuddered as a torpedo ripped into her hull amidships. Flames erupted from the fuel stores below deck. Chaos broke out instantly. "Abandon ship! Abandon ship!" shouted Captain Matsuda, his voice barely audible over the roar of destruction. The destroyer Tanakaze launched depth charges in fury, attempting to flush out the submarine hiding beneath the waves. The sea exploded around the USS Tang, concussion after concussion threatening to crush her steel skin. But Whitaker remained calm, maneuvering expertly to evade the deadly barrage. In the darkness below, the crew worked in perfect synchronicity. "Dive to 200 feet," Whitaker ordered. "Prepare for another strike." The USS Tang's sonar picked up the retreating convoy, damaged but still moving. The commander made a bold decision. "We finish this tonight. No mercy." The next attack was a masterpiece of stealth and timing. The submarine surfaced briefly in the dark to reload torpedoes, then slipped beneath again to follow the crippled ships. Two more torpedoes found their mark, sending the second cargo ship to the depths, its bow dragging soldiers and supplies down into the abyss. Back on the Japanese vessels, panic was spreading. "We're sitting ducks," one sailor shouted. "Where is the air cover?" There was none. The Japanese Air Force was stretched thin, and the American submarines had gained the upper hand. The final blow came as the convoy attempted to scatter. The USS Tang's last two torpedoes targeted the remaining vessels. The escort destroyer Tanakaze was hit amidships, her engines silenced instantly. Flames tore through her decks as she listed to port and began to sink. Over 3,000 Japanese lives were lost that night. The attack was swift, brutal, and devastating, a textbook example of submarine warfare's deadly efficiency. In Washington, Intelligence officers pored over decrypted Japanese messages confirming the loss. The Allies had struck a blow not only to Japanese logistics, but to morale. "This is the kind of victory that shortens wars," said Admiral Chester Nimitz in a briefing. But the war was far from over. In the months ahead, American submarines would continue to stalk the Pacific, each patrol a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. For the men in the steel boats, every mission carried the weight of history and the hope of ending the nightmare that had engulfed the world. As the USS Tang sailed back to base, battered but triumphant, Commander Whitaker addressed his crew. "Tonight, we send a message from the shadows. The enemy may be stunned, but we will not rest. The Pacific belongs to those who dare to fight unseen. Depth charges incoming. Brace for impact," yelled Lieutenant Commander Frank Spencer, his voice slicing through the tense silence of the USS Harter's control room. The submarine trembled as the ocean exploded just yards away, violent shock waves rattling bulkheads and shaking equipment loose. It was late 1944. The Pacific War had grown brutal and relentless. American submarines prowled the vast ocean like lethal predators, hunting vital Japanese supply lines that stretched thousands of miles from the home islands to the front lines in the Philippines and beyond. The USS Harter, commanded by Spencer, was one of the deadliest hunters in the Pacific Fleet. In just a few months, she had sunk over 15 enemy vessels. But each mission came with dangers that could drown a crew in seconds. "We need to lose them," Spencer commanded calmly. "Dive deeper. Take us to 400 feet." The submarine angled downward, her steel hull groaning under the pressure as they descended into the abyss. Outside, enemy destroyers circled, deploying patterns of depth charges designed to crush the Harter's fragile hull. "Sonar's picking up the convoy again, sir," said sonar operator Ensign Robert Hayes, wiping sweat from his brow. "They're regrouping, heading west at 12 knots. Prepare torpedoes. We hit them before they reach Leyte Gulf." Spencer's voice was a mix of urgency and steel resolve. "The fate of the campaign depends on this." Thousands of miles away, the Japanese Naval Command grew increasingly anxious. Their supply convoys, especially those carrying troops, fuel, and ammunition, were under constant threat. Failure to protect them meant the islands they clung to in the Philippines could be lost. Rear Admiral Masaki Tanaka stood aboard the light cruiser Kuma, coordinating the convoy's defense. His face was set in grim determination as he barked orders to his officers. "Deploy the air patrols at dawn. Escort vessels. Maintain close formation. The Americans will strike from below, but we will not let them pass." Despite their efforts, Japanese commanders were fighting an invisible enemy. American codebreakers at Station Hypo in Hawaii had cracked Japanese naval codes months earlier. The Allies now intercepted vital communications revealing convoy routes, timings, and even tactical orders. This intelligence was a silent weapon, guiding American submarines like the Harter and Tang to their prey with deadly accuracy. Back on the Harter, Spencer's crew readied their attack. "Torpedo tubes ready, sir," announced Chief Torpedo Man First Class James Wallace. "Good. Target the lead transport, Yamato Maru, and the escorting destroyer Shigyur," Spencer ordered. The Harter slipped into position beneath the dark waves, the world outside reduced to sonar pings and instrument readings. The attack was calculated, the timing precise. Firing in 5, 4, 3. Spencer's finger tightened on the trigger. Two torpedoes raced forward, their wake invisible in the murky depths. Seconds later, two massive explosions ripped through the convoy. The Yamato Maru rocked violently as water surged into ruptured compartments, flames licking the night sky from fuel stores igniting. The destroyer Shigyur scrambled to retaliate, launching depth charges and zigzagging desperately to shake the submarine's deadly presence. "Depth charges again," shouted sonar officer Hayes, sweat dripping down his temple. "Incoming pattern, starboard side." Spencer remained calm. "Take us deeper and turn left." Evasive maneuvers. The crew worked in perfect synchrony, expertly handling the controls to dodge the deadly patterns. The Harter's hull creaked and groaned, but held firm. Meanwhile, the Japanese troops aboard the Yamato Maru faced chaos. Panic and confusion spread quickly as soldiers scrambled to abandon the sinking ship. Over 2,500 men were trapped below decks when the hull breached. The sea swallowed the vessel swiftly, dragging thousands into its cold grasp. "Hold your positions. Stay calm," shouted Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura, struggling to maintain order as the ship listed heavily. On the destroyer Shigure, Captain Masaru Kobayashi barked orders to his crew as the submarine's torpedoes continued to shadow their movements. "Keep your eyes sharp. That submarine is still out there. We will not let it escape." But the Harter was already plotting its next move. Spencer knew the Japanese were desperate to protect their supplies, and desperation made them predictable. "Prepare a second attack. This convoy will not reach Leyte," Spencer declared. "Load 2 more torpedoes on tubes 1 and 3. We finish this tonight." The submarine's engines hummed softly as they maneuvered for position beneath the escort vessels. "Fire!" Spencer commanded again, voice steady but commanding. 2 more torpedoes surged forward, striking the cargo ship Hiryu Maru and crippling it with explosions that shook the night. The Hiryu Maru burst into flames as fuel ignited, sending thick black smoke into the air, a grim beacon signaling disaster for the convoy. On deck, Japanese sailors scrambled to fight the blaze, but their efforts were in vain. The ship's magazines detonated moments later, ripping it apart in a shower of fire and debris. Back on the Harter, Spencer allowed himself a brief moment of grim satisfaction. They'll think twice before sailing these waters again. As the sun began to rise over the Philippine Sea, the remaining convoy vessels turned for home, battered and broken. Japanese air patrols arrived too late, their planes sweeping overhead, but unable to locate the elusive submarines that had struck from beneath the waves. The cost was staggering. Over 3,000 Japanese soldiers killed or missing, and critical supplies lost to the depths. For the Allied forces preparing for the Leyte Gulf invasion, this was a crippling blow to Japan's defensive capabilities. In Washington, Admiral Chester Nimitz received the reports with a rare smile. "The silent service continues to prove its worth," he remarked. "Each successful patrol brings us closer to ending this war." But for the crews of the submarines like the Harter and Tang, there was little time to celebrate. The ocean remained a deadly chessboard, and their next moves could mean life or death in the days ahead. Commander Spencer addressed his men after the patrol. "We fight from the shadows, but our impact is clear. Remember this night. The enemy was stunned, and so will they be again. Sound the alert." "They're closing in," cried Lieutenant Commander Frank Spencer, the voice of the USS Harter's captain slicing through the tense silence like a razor. The sonar operator's fingers flew over the console as the unmistakable thrum of enemy destroyer engines grew louder. The waters off the Philippine Sea had turned into a lethal battleground. Japanese destroyers hunted relentlessly, their sonar sweeping the dark depths in a deadly cat-and-mouse game with American submarines that moved unseen beneath the waves. "Steady as she goes," Spencer ordered, calm but alert. "Take us down to 450 feet. We're going to outlast them." The Harter's steel hull creaked and groaned under the increasing pressure of the ocean. Every creak was a stark reminder of the thin line between life and death below the surface. Outside, enemy depth charges pounded relentlessly, shaking the submarine as shockwaves surged through her. "Captain, we've got 2 destroyers bearing down on our position," sonar operator Ensign Robert Hayes reported, beads of sweat trickling down his face. "Prepare evasive maneuvers," Spencer ordered. "Drop silent running. No unnecessary noise." The submarine's crew worked flawlessly, cutting engines and relying on the silence of the deep to mask their position. The enemy ships slowed, scanning carefully for any sign of their hidden prey. On the surface, Captain Masaru Kobayashi of the Shigure paced the deck with mounting frustration. The destroyer's crew scanned the waves, depth charge racks ready to unleash destruction on the elusive American submarine. "Fire pattern Alpha," Kobayashi shouted, his voice resolute. "We will not lose any more ships to these underwater ghosts." Below decks, Spencer's heart pounded. He knew each second could be his last. "Keep her steady," he whispered to his crew. "This is survival." The submarine slipped away from danger, veering silently to a new position where the enemy would least expect it. This was the art of submarine warfare: patience, cunning, and deadly precision. The USS Tang, another submarine operating nearby under Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane, was on the prowl as well. Just days earlier, Tang had sunk a massive Japanese tanker, the Unyo Maru, disrupting critical fuel supplies destined for the front lines. O'Kane was determined to keep the pressure on. "Captain, sonar reports multiple targets ahead," O'Kane's executive officer announced. Load torpedoes. Let's make history again, O'Kane replied, voice steady and cold as steel. On deck of the Japanese cruiser Kiso, Rear Admiral Masaki Tanaka tightened his grip on the binoculars, his face etched with worry. The losses had been heavy, and the threat from below the waves seemed unstoppable. Prepare for torpedo attack. Scatter the convoy, he ordered. But it was too late. In the deep silence beneath the waves, Tang's torpedoes sped forward, seeking their targets with deadly accuracy. Hit confirmed, O'Kane yelled as the first torpedo slammed into the Kiso's starboard side. Flames erupted instantly, engulfing the ship in a fiery inferno. Brace for impact, crewmen shouted as the cruiser began to list heavily. Simultaneously, the Harter launched a coordinated strike on a nearby supply ship, the Satsuma Maru, crippling her engines and sending her spiraling into the ocean's depths. The synchronized attacks left the Japanese Naval Command scrambling. Their supply lines were bleeding, their forces demoralized by the invisible killer lurking beneath the waves. As night fell, the submarines slipped silently into the shadows, their crews exhausted but triumphant. Back aboard the Harter, Spencer addressed his men in the cramped control room. Remember, every ship we sink, every convoy we disrupt, brings us one step closer to victory. We fight not just for ourselves, but for every soldier on the front lines who depends on those supplies not reaching the enemy. Captain, we have a message incoming from Station Hypo, radio operator Ensign Tom Bradley announced. Spencer took the decrypted message in his hands, a critical update revealing the route of the next major Japanese convoy attempting to reinforce their island garrisons. This is our next target, Spencer said, eyes blazing. Prepare for departure at first light. We're going to finish what we started. The war beneath the waves was far from over. The silent service had stunned the Japanese Navy, but the fight to control the Pacific was entering a new and deadly phase, one where the fate of thousands depended on the shadows where submarines ruled supreme. All hands, prepare for depth charge barrage. The shout cut through the cramped passageways of the USS Harter like a thunderclap. The metallic clang of hatches sealing shut echoed, as every crew member braced for the inevitable. It was early morning in the Philippine Sea, the sun barely cresting the horizon, casting eerie shadows over the restless waves. The Harter had just struck another blow against the Japanese supply lines, crippling the freighter Satsuma Maru. But victory was fleeting. Japanese destroyers now closed in with lethal intent. Lieutenant Commander Frank Spencer gripped the control wheel, his knuckles pale beneath the dim red lights of the control room. Silent running. Hold your nerve, men. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of command. Every heartbeat was a reminder. One wrong move could mean death. Depth charges incoming, sonar operator Ensign Robert Hayes warned, his voice trembling despite years of training. The first shockwave rocked the submarine violently, rattling equipment and sending a cold wave of fear down every spine. The Harter groaned under the assault. Damage report. Spencer barked. Minor hull breaches on the starboard side, but nothing critical, the engineer replied through the intercom. The crew moved swiftly to stabilize the situation, patching leaks and securing loose gear. Meanwhile, aboard the Japanese destroyer Shigeru, Captain Masaru Kobayashi's eyes burned with determination. They think they can outlast us in these waters? Depth charges, full spread. Show no mercy. The Shigeru had a deadly reputation. Known among American submariners as the Lucky Destroyer, it had sunk or damaged multiple U.S. submarines. Tonight, its crew was intent on adding the Harter to that list. Below the waves, Spencer's mind raced. He needed a way out, fast. Prepare to dive to 600 feet, he ordered. The Harter's steel hull creaked ominously as it descended into crushing darkness. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the sonar room. Contact. Another destroyer closing in, bearing 045. Hayes reported. Evasive maneuvers. Spencer commanded. The submarine changed course, weaving through underwater canyons and rocky outcrops. This was the nature of the submarine war in the Pacific, relentless cat-and-mouse engagements where seconds decided survival or destruction. Elsewhere, the USS Tang, under Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane, was stalking a different prey. Reports indicated a heavily armed Japanese convoy heading for Leyte Gulf, reinforcing defenses against the impending American invasion. Target confirmed, O'Kane's executive officer said, voice tense. For transports, 2 destroyers. Load torpedoes and prepare for attack, O'Kane ordered, his voice cold and precise. As the Tang slipped through the depths, its crew readied for another deadly strike. The Japanese sailors on the convoy were unaware of the danger lurking beneath their hulls. On the bridge of the cruiser Kiso, Rear Admiral Masaki Tanaka studied the horizon, his face grim. "We must protect these transports at all costs," he said. "Without these supplies, our island garrisons will fall." Suddenly, lookouts shouted warnings. Torpedo wakes spotted cutting through the water toward their ships. "All hands, battle stations," Tanaka commanded. The ensuing chaos was brutal. Explosions rocked the convoy as torpedoes found their marks, igniting fires and sending men screaming into the sea. The Tang maneuvered expertly, firing salvo after salvo with deadly precision. Back on the Harter, the crew's ordeal was far from over. "Captain, we're losing depth control," the navigator shouted. "Steady," Spencer commanded, fighting the submarine's descent into a crushing underwater abyss. "Counterflood tanks. Bring us back to 450 feet. The crew worked feverishly, battling the forces of nature and enemy fire. Outside, the relentless pounding of depth charges continued. "Damage report," Spencer demanded. "Hull integrity holding, but air filtration compromised," the engineer replied. "We have limited breathable air for the next hour." Spencer nodded grimly. The clock was ticking. Every breath became precious. Suddenly, the sonar operator's voice cut through the tension. "Multiple enemy ships converging on our position. We're surrounded," Spencer muttered under his breath. "Prepare for emergency surface." With a grinding roar, the Harter ascended rapidly, breaking through the ocean's surface into the open air. The enemy destroyers opened fire immediately, their guns blazing. "Return fire," Spencer ordered. The Harter's deck guns roared to life, peppering the destroyers with a hail of bullets. The battle above water was fierce and desperate. The Harter's crew fought valiantly, buying precious time to repair systems and prepare to dive once more. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto received grim reports from the front lines. America's submarines were decimating Japan's supply chains faster than reinforcements could arrive. "We must develop new tactics to counter this threat," Yamamoto stated. "Our forces depend on these supplies." Back in the Pacific, the USS Tang and USS Harter continued their deadly campaign, striking fear into the hearts of Japanese sailors. Each attack was a message. The Pacific belonged to no one, especially not to those who underestimated the silent killers lurking beneath the waves. As the sun set, Spencer addressed his exhausted crew. "Tonight, we rest, but tomorrow, we strike again. Our mission is far from over. For every ship we sink, every convoy we disrupt, we bring our nation closer to victory. All hands, battle stations." The urgent cry shattered the fragile calm within the USS Tang. Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane's voice was steady but fierce as the sonar room buzzed with frantic energy. The Japanese convoy, despite earlier devastation, had regrouped and was now launching a deadly counterattack. Outside, the dark ocean surface rippled under the weight of countless enemy warships, destroyers, cruisers, and patrol boats, hungry to annihilate the American submarines stalking their waters. The Tang, lurking some 150 feet below, was about to face its most lethal challenge yet. "Contact bearing 120 degrees, reported sonar operator petty officer, First Class James Holland, eyes glued to the flickering screen. Multiple screws closing in, speed increasing. "Prepare to dive to maximum depth," O'Kane commanded. The submarine trembled as it plummeted deeper, the crushing pressure pressing against its reinforced hull. The crew was trained for this moment, but the tension was palpable. Every second could mean life or death. Depth charges inbound. The violent thuds echoed like thunder through the hull. Each explosion sent shockwaves that rattled machinery and strained the steel structure. In the Japanese destroyer Amatsuke's, Captain Hiroshi Yamamoto barked orders with ruthless precision. "Keep those torpedoes ready. I want that American sub sunk before nightfall. No mistakes." As the depth charges continued pounding, O'Kane's thoughts flashed back to earlier battles. The ambush of the convoy near Leyte Gulf, the stealthy strikes that crippled supply lines, the faces of young sailors lost in the chaos. "We can't stay here much longer," The engineer shouted over the din, hull integrity at 85% and dropping. Get ready to counterattack, O'Kane ordered. Bring us to attack depth. We'll give them a taste of American steel. Outside, the ocean was a deadly maze. Japanese ships moved with deadly coordination, sweeping the waters with sonar and depth charges. The American submarines were the hunted. Suddenly, the Tang's torpedo officer announced, targets in range. For transports and 2 destroyers. Fire torpedoes, O'Kane commanded. The submarine trembled as the tubes launched a deadly volley into the enemy formation. Minutes later, muffled explosions reverberated through the hull. Through periscope scopes, the crew watched as fire and smoke erupted from Japanese ships. The transports, critical for ferrying troops and supplies, burned and sank beneath the waves. But victory came at a cost. The destroyers responded with a fierce barrage of depth charges, forcing the Tang into a desperate game of underwater hide-and-seek. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Harter, Lieutenant Commander Frank Spencer was plotting the next move. Intelligence confirms a major Japanese fleet moving toward the Marianas. We need to disrupt their operations. His crew nodded grimly, the hardships of months beneath the sea etched on every face. Each patrol was a brush with death. Every successful strike came with narrow escapes. Back on the Japanese flagship Yamato, Admiral Somu Toyota paced the bridge. The news from intelligence was grim. American submarines had become an existential threat to Japan's hold on the Pacific. We must bolster anti-submarine defenses immediately, Toyota declared. Every convoy must have destroyer escorts, and aircraft patrols need to intensify. On a distant island airstrip, Lieutenant Aiko Nakamura, a Japanese naval aviator, prepared for a reconnaissance flight. The Americans' undersea war had shifted the battle to the skies and the depths below. We'll find those submarines, Nakamura vowed. We will turn the tide. Back in the Tang's control room, O'Kane reflected on the silent war beneath the waves. Our advantage is stealth and surprise. But the enemy learns quickly. Suddenly, sonar crackled. Incoming torpedo. Hard right rudder. O'Kane shouted. The submarine twisted violently, narrowly evading the deadly missile. Return fire. The Tang launched torpedoes at the pursuing destroyer, scoring a direct hit that sent it to the ocean floor. The battle was far from over. Both sides fought with brutal determination, knowing the Pacific was the deciding ground for the fate of nations. Hours later, the Tang surfaced under the cover of darkness. Exhausted but victorious, O'Kane addressed his crew. Tonight, we celebrate the men we've stopped from reaching their shores. Tomorrow, the hunt continues. America's submarines will not rest. Sound the alarm. Enemy aircraft spotted overhead. The piercing shout from the USS Tang's lookout jolted the crew into action. The fragile silence that usually cloaked the submarine was shattered as the unmistakable drone of Japanese bombers filled the sky above the darkened sea. Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane's face hardened. The Tang had survived relentless depth charge attacks and deadly encounters, but now air threats were closing in fast. Prepare for emergency dive. Dive! Dive! O'Kane commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The submarine's ballast tanks flooded as it plunged below the waves, vanishing into the murky depths just as bombs exploded on the surface. Inside the cramped control room, the crew gripped their stations as the submarine shuddered under the shock waves. Every explosion was a grim reminder of the fine line between survival and destruction. Damage report, O'Kane demanded. Minor hull breach port side, flooding contained. The engineer responded quickly. We're still operational. Good. We're not done yet. O'Kane's mind raced. Intelligence had just intercepted a new Japanese convoy route. This was the last chance to strike a decisive blow. Far above, the Yamato and her escort fleet struggled with damage inflicted by American subs days earlier. Admiral Somu Toyota's voice crackled over the radio from the flagship. All ships, increase anti-submarine patrols. The enemy is striking at our very lifeline. We must adapt or lose everything. Back beneath the waves, the Tang stealthily navigated through treacherous underwater canyons toward the convoy's projected path. The sonar operator whispered, multiple contacts ahead, for heavy transports and at least 3 destroyers. O'Kane signaled the crew to prepare torpedoes. We'll hit them before they know what's coming. This attack will cripple their resupply efforts for months. In the Japanese convoy flagship, Captain Hiroshi Yamamoto paced nervously. "The submarines are relentless," he muttered. "We must change tactics." Orders were sent to scatter the convoy, hoping to dilute the submarine threat. But it was too late. Suddenly, the Tang's torpedo tubes discharged in unison. The deadly weapons streaked through the water with lethal precision. "Direct hit on transport number 2, sonar announced. The massive ship erupted in flames, smoke billowing as men scrambled on deck. Another explosion rocked the convoy. Transport 3 was crippled, taking hundreds of troops and supplies to the bottom. Chaos ensued. Destroyers turned sharply to retaliate, depth charges ready to fall. Evasive maneuvers. O'Kane ordered, guiding the Tang into narrow underwater ravines to avoid counterattack. The crew held their breath as the ocean shook violently with explosions. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the sub. An underwater explosion had rocked the hull. "Damage severe," the engineer cried. "We've lost propulsion on the starboard side. Damage control teams, report." O'Kane demanded. Teams worked frantically to contain flooding and repair vital systems. Time was running out. The Japanese destroyers closed in, searching desperately for the elusive Hunter. On the bridge of the flagship Yamato, Admiral Toyota shouted over the din, "Deploy all available aircraft to hunt the American subs. We cannot lose the Marianas." Meanwhile, in a hidden Japanese coastal command post, intelligence officers scrambled to piece together the assault. "The Americans are using decrypted codes," one officer grimly reported. "They knew our convoy routes in advance." "This betrayal cuts deep," said his superior. "We must change our encryption immediately." Back inside the Tang, O'Kane made a fateful decision. "We can't fight them off indefinitely. Prepare to surface on my mark. We'll engage with deck guns if necessary." The sub rose cautiously, breaking the surface under the cloak of darkness. Spotlights from enemy destroyers scanned the waters. "Ready the deck guns," O'Kane commanded. The Tang's 5-inch deck gun roared to life, shells exploding around the nearest destroyer. The surprise and ferocity of the attack threw the Japanese off balance. After intense exchanges, the Tang slipped beneath the waves once more, limping but victorious. The sun rose on a devastated Japanese convoy, the sea littered with the wreckage of ships and the echoes of hundreds lost. O'Kane addressed his weary crew. "You have struck a blow that will echo through the Pacific. Our silent war has shifted the tide." As word of the attack spread, the Imperial Japanese Navy faced the stark reality. America's submarines were an unstoppable force, striking unseen from the shadows. If you want to dive deeper into these thrilling stories of courage and strategy that changed history, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Your support keeps history alive. Stay tuned for more gripping tales from the greatest conflicts of our time.